1946. Harlem. Before he was Malcolm X, the voice of black consciousness who would challenge America to confront its racism, he was Malcolm Little. Street name: Detroit Red. A 21-year-old hustler running numbers, selling drugs, burglarizing homes, doing whatever it took to survive in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty since childhood. And in the spring of 1946, Detroit Red made a mistake that should have gotten him killed. What saved him wasn't luck. It wasn't divine intervention. It wasn't fate. It was Bumpy Johnson who saw something in a reckless young hustler that nobody else could see. This is the story of the night Bumpy Johnson saved Malcolm X's life. And in doing so, he may have saved the civil rights movement itself. Malcolm Little arrived in Harlem in 1942, a 16-year-old kid from Michigan with nothing but anger and survival instinct. By 1946, he'd earned his street name, Detroit Red, from his reddish hair and his hometown. He was known in the neighborhood as sharp, quick-witted, and absolutely fearless, which, in the world he'd chosen, was both an asset and a liability. Red ran with a crew of small-time hustlers. They ran numbers for various operators, sold marijuana to jazz musicians, occasionally pulled burglaries in wealthy white neighborhoods across the river. He was good at it, smart enough to avoid most trouble, charming enough to talk his way out of what he couldn't avoid. But Red had one fatal flaw. According to those who knew him then, he didn't know when to stop talking. March 19th, 1946. Small's Paradise nightclub. Detroit Red was at the bar, high on Benzedrine, talking loud about a score his crew had just pulled. A home burglary in Queens that had netted them some jewelry and about $3,000 in cash. What Red didn't know was that the home belonged to the mistress of Anthony Little Augie Pisano, a captain in the Genovese crime family. And Little Augie's mistress was sitting 3 stools down from Red at that same bar, listening to him brag about stealing her jewelry. She made one phone call. By midnight, Little Augie had put out a contract, $500 to whoever brought him Detroit Red's head. Not metaphorically, literally. The word spread through Harlem's underworld quickly. Detroit Red had stolen from the wrong person. Little Augie wanted him dead, and $500 was good money for a simple hit. By March 20th, at least 3 different crews were looking for Malcolm Little. Red heard about it the next morning from one of his running partners, a guy named Sammy who worked as a shoe shine boy and heard everything. "Red, you gotta leave town," Sammy said, his voice urgent. "Little Augie's people are asking around for you. They know where you live. They know where you work. They're gonna find you." According to Malcolm's own later accounts, his first instinct was to run, get on a train to Boston where he had family, disappear until things cooled down. But Red had a problem. He owed money to 6 people in Harlem. He had merchandise, stolen goods, that he couldn't move if he left town. And he had pride, the kind of stupid masculine pride that gets young men killed. "I ain't running from no Italian mobster," Red reportedly said. "I'll handle it." Sammy looked at him like he was crazy. "Handle it? Red, this ain't some street beef. This is the mob. They're gonna kill you." "Then I'll see them coming." Red bought a gun. A .38 revolver, cheap. Probably wouldn't fire straight, but it made him feel safer. He started sleeping in different places every night, moving around, watching his back. But Harlem isn't that big, and when killers are looking for you, eventually they find you. March 23rd, 1946. 3 days after the contract was issued, 2 hitmen, both experienced soldiers from the Genovese family, tracked Detroit Red to a rooming house on 133rd Street. They waited outside, patient, professional. When Red came out at 7 p.m., heading to a card game across town, they followed him. Red never saw them, never knew they were there. He walked 3 blocks, cutting through an alley as a shortcut, and that's where they were going to do it. Quick, quiet, 2 shots to the back of the head. Leave the body, collect the 500. They were 20 feet behind him when a voice stopped them cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The 2 hitmen turned around. Bumpy Johnson stood at the alley entrance with Illinois Gordon and 2 other men. No guns visible. But the message was clear. One of the hitmen, a guy named Carmine, knew who Bumpy was. Everyone in Harlem did. Mr. Redyer Johnson, Carmine said carefully. This ain't your business. We got a contract from little Augie. Bumpy walked forward slowly, his hands in his coat pockets. I know about the contract. But the kid you're about to kill? He's under my protection now. The second hitman, younger and stupider, spoke up. Since when? Little Augie's going to want to know why you're interfering. Bumpy stopped 5 feet from them. Tell little Augie the Detroit Red didn't know whose house he was hitting. Tell him the kid's reckless, but he's not stupid. He wouldn't have touched that place if he knew. And tell him, as a personal favor to me, I'm asking him to cancel the contract. Carmine was doing the math in his head. $500 versus crossing Bumpy Johnson. It wasn't even close. We'll pass along the message, Carmine said. Good. And tell him I'll make sure the jewelry gets returned. The 2 hitmen backed away, then turned and left the alley. Detroit Red, who'd been walking ahead, completely oblivious to how close he'd come to dying, kept walking. Bumpy watched him disappear around the corner, then turned to Illinois. Bring him to me. Tonight. That night, Detroit Red was brought to Bumpy Johnson's apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. According to accounts from those close to both men, Red walked in cocky, defensive, not fully understanding what had happened. Bumpy sat in his usual chair, a glass of cognac on the table beside him. You know who I am? Bumpy asked. Yeah. You're Bumpy Johnson. And you know what almost happened to you tonight? Red shrugged, trying to play it cool. I heard little Augie's people were looking for me. I was handling it. Bumpy almost smiled. Handling it? You were 30 seconds from having your brains blown out in an alley, and you were handling it. That got through Red's defenses. His expression changed. What are you talking about? 2 professional killers were following you. They had guns drawn. They were about to execute you. I stopped them. The room went quiet. Red's cocky attitude disappeared. He looked young suddenly. Scared. Why? Red asked quietly. Bumpy took a sip of his cognac. Because I've been watching you, Red. You're smart, smarter than you act. You've got potential, and I don't like seeing potential wasted because of stupid mistakes. I didn't know it was little Augie's girl's house. I know you didn't, which is why you're still breathing. But you need to understand something. The life you're living, the way you're moving, you're going to be dead within a year, maybe 6 months. Red bristled. I can take care of myself? No, you can't. You're a street hustler with more mouth than sense. You talk too loud. You take too many risks. You don't think ahead. And in this world, that gets you killed. Bumpy leaned forward. But I'm going to give you a choice. You can keep doing what you're doing, and I'll let nature take its course. Or you can listen to what I'm about to tell you, and maybe you'll live long enough to actually become something. Red swallowed hard. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, but I'm going to tell you some things, and you're going to listen. According to Malcolm X's autobiography and various interviews he gave later in life, what Bumpy Johnson told him that night changed his entire perspective. Bumpy didn't lecture him about crime being wrong, didn't try to save his soul, didn't preach. Instead, Bumpy talked to him about power, about respect, about the difference between surviving and building something that lasts. You're angry, Bumpy said. I can see it. You're angry at white people, angry at the system, angry at the world. And you got a right to be. But anger without direction is just destruction. You'll burn yourself out and leave nothing behind. What else am I supposed to do? Red asked, his voice carrying genuine pain. The world don't want people like us. I tried going straight. Tried working legitimate jobs. They treat you like dirt. At least out here, I got some respect. You got fear. That's not the same as respect. Respect is what you earn by being smart, being reliable, being someone people can count on. What you got now, that's just people being scared of what you might do because you're unpredictable. Bumpy stood up, walked to the window, looked out at Harlem. I'm going to tell you something most people don't understand. Real power, it doesn't come from a gun. It doesn't come from how tough you are. It comes from here. He tapped his temple. From thinking, from strategy, from building something bigger than yourself. Red listened. Really listened. You're young, Bumpy continued. You got time to figure out who you really are. But you need to slow down. You need to think. And you need to understand that the life you're living right now, it's a dead end. Literally. Then Bumpy said something that, according to Malcolm's later accounts, stayed with him for the rest of his life. You got a mind, Red. I can see it. You think fast, you talk fast, you learn fast. But you're wasting it on nickels and dimes. Someday, you're going to need to decide what you really want to be. A hustler who dies young, or something bigger. The conversation lasted. When it ended, Bumpy had arranged for the stolen jewelry to be returned to little Augie's mistress through intermediaries. The contract on Detroit Red was canceled. But more importantly, something had shifted in young Malcolm Little. 2 months after that conversation, Detroit Red was arrested for burglary in Boston. He was sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison. Most people would have seen that as the end of the story. Another young black man swallowed by the system. But prison is where Malcolm Little met a man named John Elton Bembry, who introduced him to the Nation of Islam. Prison is where he started reading everything he could get his hands on. Prison is where Detroit Red died and Malcolm X was born. And according to Malcolm himself, in interviews years later, Bumpy Johnson's words kept echoing in his head during those prison years. You got a mind. Use it for something bigger. When Malcolm X was released from prison in 1952, he was a changed man. He'd found direction for his anger. He'd found purpose. He became one of the most important voices in the civil rights movement. A leader, a thinker, someone who challenged America to confront its racism. Everything he became, everything he accomplished, happened because he survived long enough to find that purpose. And he survived because on March 23, 1946, Bumpy Johnson stepped into an alley and stopped 2 hitmen from killing a reckless young hustler named Detroit Red. Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X maintained contact over the years. According to various accounts, they would occasionally see each other in Harlem. A nod of respect, brief conversations, an acknowledgement of what had passed between them. Malcolm never forgot what Bumpy had done, and Bumpy, according to those close to him, took quiet pride in watching Malcolm become exactly what he'd said that young man could be. Something bigger. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, Malcolm X had already been assassinated 3 years earlier. They never got to have a final conversation, never got closure on that relationship. But the impact was undeniable. In 1964, during an interview, Malcolm X was asked about his time as a street hustler in Harlem. He talked about the people who'd influenced him during those years, and he mentioned Bumpy Johnson. There was a man in Harlem, Malcolm said, who told me I had potential when I was just another kid headed nowhere. He didn't save me because he thought I'd become what I became. He saved me because he believed wasted potential was a tragedy. That stayed with me. The interviewer asked if Malcolm regretted his criminal past. Malcolm's response: I regret the things I did wrong, but I don't regret the lessons I learned. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Or the exact details of this story, the conversation in Bumpy's apartment, the specific words spoken, even the precise date, vary depending on who tells it. What's documented is this. Malcolm X did operate in Harlem as a young hustler in the 1940s under the name Detroit Red. He did have close calls with criminal elements, and he did reference Bumpy Johnson in later interviews as someone who'd shown him a different perspective during that time. Whether Bumpy literally saved Malcolm from a mob hit that specific night, or whether this story represents a composite of their interactions during that period, what matters is the broader truth. Bumpy Johnson saw potential in an angry young man that most people dismissed as just another street criminal. And he invested time in that young man, gave him perspective, planted seeds that would eventually grow into something profound. That's the power of mentorship. That's the impact one conversation can have. Malcolm X went on to inspire millions. His words, his courage, his willingness to speak uncomfortable truths changed the trajectory of civil rights in America. And somewhere in that legacy is a moment in 1946 when a gangster looked at a hustler and said, "You could be something bigger." This story teaches us something most people miss about influence and legacy. Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. He ran illegal operations. He operated outside the law. He did things that were morally wrong, but he also recognized potential. He also understood the value of investing in young people. He also knew that wasting a brilliant mind on stupid mistakes was a tragedy. And because of that recognition, because he took time to mentor someone he had no obligation to help, the world got Malcolm X. Not just a hustler who survived, not just a man who found religion in prison, but a leader who challenged an entire nation to be better. That's the complicated truth about people. We're not all good or all bad. We're capable of both harm and help. And sometimes the most unlikely person becomes the catalyst for something extraordinary. Bumpy Johnson saved Malcolm X's life. And in doing so, he contributed to a legacy far bigger than anything he built in Harlem's underworld. Sometimes the most important thing we do isn't the thing we're known for. Sometimes it's recognizing potential in someone else and giving them the chance to become who they're meant to be. If this story changed how you think about legacy, influence, and unexpected mentorship, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem Godfather, for stories that reveal the complexity of history and the people who shaped it. Turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Did you know about the connection between Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X? What does this story teach you about recognizing potential in others? Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't given. It was earned. And sometimes the most important thing you earn isn't power. It's the gratitude of someone whose life you changed. This is Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem Godfather. And we're just getting started.